So, the chapter begins with macromolecules, but it also starts with a mention about carbon, which is on your homework. So let's begin with carbon. Macromolecules are the stuff of life, but anything that's living is called to be organic. And the reason we call it organic is because it has a backbone made of carbon. Now, why is it carbon that is the backbone of all living things, and why do we use the term organic? It's because carbon is versatile in the fact that it can create 4 unique bonds. So it's very unique in that it can create one bond here, a bond here, a bond here, and a bond here. And because it can create those 4 different bonds, it can create straight chains, branches, mega molecules. It can attach to itself. It can attach to almost anything out there. So anything that's organic, it's said to be organic because it has a backbone of carbon, and those are living things. So make sure you know that. You might want to add that to your notes. Yes. Yeah. These are your notes. Okay. So macromolecules are the basic stuff of life. So carbon is the backbone to carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. Your first vocabulary terms, if you look at the list, everything in blue is off of today's lecture, 2.3. So first 2 words are monomer and polymer. So I want you to add this sentence to your notes. All of these carbohydrates, proteins, and nucleic acids, they start out as monomers, which are simple forms, and they build into their longer form, which is a polymer. So make sure that you know that the monomer, what does mono mean? Mono? One. Poly?
2.
Many. So monomer is one unique subunit. A monomer is a small molecule. And when you put a whole bunch of those monomers together, you start to build what is called a polymer. Of the macromolecules we're going to learn today, carbohydrates, proteins, and nucleic acids all do this. They start out as monomers and they build into polymers. So make sure that you understand the difference between the term monomer and polymer.
Those are all monomers? Carbohydrates?
These are actually the name we give them when they're polymers, but they all start out as monomers. And each slide will present to you their monomer version. Okay? So your first macromolecule that we're going to learn is carbohydrates. Carbohydrates, simply put, are used for energy. That's how we store energy in our bodies, but even for plants, they store energy using the carbohydrate form, which is simply sugar. Okay? Now, I'm not talking about carbohydrates like bread, because bread actually has carbs, it has fat, it has everything in it. I'm talking about the molecule of sugar. So, all simple sugars, the monomer version of simple sugars, have a structure that contains a carbon, a hydrogen, and an oxygen. Carbon, hydrogens, and oxygens. However, it's in a unique ratio of 1 to 2 to 1. So for every 1 carbon, you are going to have 2 hydrogens. So again, for every 1 carbon, you are going to have 2 hydrogens. So does anybody know the formula for, let's say, the most common sugar out there, which is glucose? Does anybody know the molecular formula of glucose? No, there's all on the So structure is C1H2O6. So the most common monomer out there is glucose. Its chemical formula is C6H12O6. 1:2 ratio. So for every 1 carbon, there are 2 hydrogens. So the number of hydrogens is double that of carbon. There are 6 carbons, 12 hydrogens. So that is distinct for the monomers of sugars. They also tend to have hexagon shapes or pentagon shapes, and you always see alcohols hanging off of them. Some examples of monomers of carbohydrates would be glucose and fructose. Now, if you put a whole bunch of glucoses together, you start to build polysaccharides. Saccharide means sugar as well. If you put a bunch of glucoses together, depending how they're bonded, that's beyond here, but depending how they're bonded, they make glycogen, starch, or cellulose. Now you're expected to be familiar with all of these examples on this slide. Disaccharides, what does di mean? 2. Saccharide means sugar, so 2 sugars. So molecules where we have only 2 of these, because they exist like that. Some common disaccharides are sucrose, which is the sugar that's in your cabinet at home, table sugar. And there is lactose, which is the sugar found in milk. So those are disaccharides. So let me repeat. Carbohydrates are the family of sugars, and they are used for energy. You start with monomers, single simple sugars. Some that are out there are glucose and fructose. Sometimes they can exist as disaccharides, which means there are 2 sugars, such as sucrose and lactose. And then sometimes they exist as huge molecules, such as glycogen, which is how we store sugar in our bodies for 24 hours. We store it in our liver, we store it in our muscles, ready to be used. Starch, huge molecule of glucoses put together. That is the food you eat. So like the fruit, whenever you bite into something, and it's a vegetable or a fruit, you're biting into starch. It's what you eat, the potato you eat. Cellulose we do not digest. That would be like the leaves of bushes, grass, things like that. Now cellulose is in all plants, but it makes up usually the outer skin or the cell wall. Any questions on carbohydrates? That's your first group of macromolecules, biological molecules. This is the stuff of life. Next biological molecule, lipids. Lipids are unique. Lipids are grouped together because they do not dissolve in water. What's the scientific word for not dissolving in water? They are non-polar. Everything in this group has been put together not because they're monomers or polymers, but because they are non-polar. They do not dissolve in water. So there is no monomer in this category. Instead, you have a picture in your notes of the most common type of lipid, which is your fat triglyceride. This is just an example. It is not a monomer, but it is the most common fat out there. So lipids are your fats, your oils, cholesterol is in this category, steroids are in this category, hormones are in this category. The phospholipid, which makes up the cell membranes. This is a picture of the phospholipid here. This is the stuff that looks like this when it comes to the cell membrane. Alright, so that phospholipid, it is in the lipid family because it has those fatty acid chains hanging off of it. Cholesterol, which is distinct because of these 4 fused rings. Cholesterol can become testosterone, can become estrogen, can become vitamin D. Estrogen and testosterone hormones that are found in your body. They are all in the steroid family. Now what makes them non-polar is the fact that they're made of a bunch of carbons and hydrogens. Now, depending on the fatty acid chain tells you whether that fat is healthy or unhealthy for you. So there are 2 types of fatty acid chains. There are saturated fatty acid chains, and if you notice, it's all straight lines, single bond. unsaturated have a double bond. There's two there. Makes it bend. Which one do you think is more healthy for you? Saturated or unsaturated? Unsaturated. Now the chemistry behind it, or the reason, is because of that bend, it can't clump, sit, or solidify. It stays usually in the liquid form when it's room temperature. Think of your olive oil and things like that. They're high in unsaturated fat, which is actually good for you. Saturated fat, such as butter, like solid crystal oil, things that solidify at room temperature, they can stack. And so they're going to be the molecule that will clog your arteries if you have too much of them, okay? So these are unsaturated or healthier due to that double bond making that bend, and saturated are not as healthy due to the ability to clog and stack and solidify. So fats, what do we use these lipids for in our bodies? So first we burn our sugar, and then let's say now you have to go into your reserve energy and start breaking down the glycogen, which breaks down into sugar. And then once you burn that, now you're going to start burning fat. So it takes a lot to eventually get there, but fat is your second energy source. However, for the most part, it's helping you in your cell membrane, your cell structure. It's helping keeping you warm and insulated as well. So this is the group of lipids. That's your second macromolecule.
What do you use?
Lipids are throughout your body. It's your fat. So it's, again, it is your second energy source. It's part